Hey guys, welcome back, and I hope you're excited because for this class we're going to focus on making buttercream flowers. So first let's review the things that I've sent you and or am in the process of sending you, depending on where you are in the cycle. Primarily frosting tips. We have one here for making petals on a flower. There's another one for making leaves, and then this third one is for making details inside of a flower. Bonus points for this guy because this is actually a writing tip. So if you're feeling ambitious and you want to write happy birthday on a cake, or you want to try and do some cursive, you can do that now. We also have some pastel food coloring because I just thought that this goes really nicely with the floral theme, and then a flower nail. I personally like to also use parchment paper when I use one of these, so if you have it available, just grab some of that. And now it's just the basics. I have 3 cake layers again. I have my turntable, I have my grip pad, my cake board, and then the spatula and scraper. I have some chocolates to stick the cake onto the cake board, and I'm going to use 4 piping bags. I'm going to use 1 to ice the cake, and then the other 3 for each tip that I've sent. And lastly, if you want, grab some cling wrap or plastic wrap if you call it that. Because you know how in that first video we did multiple colors into 1 piping bag? That's really cool for flowers too, and I like to do 2 colors, even just like a white and a yellow sometimes. So optional, you don't have to have that, but I'll show it in this video. Lastly, I'm not going to go into as much detail, so if you find that there's something you need to see again, like maybe how to put the frosting in the piping bag, just pause this video and go back to the first one where I kind of visit those things more in depth. I think that's everything, so let's go.
Let's start by adding a little bit of chocolate, and remember, you don't need to put this in the microwave for too long. It should still be somewhat thick. If you overheat it, it can actually make the chocolate kind of grainy. I used the white chocolate because for this cake, I'm using vanilla. Remember to level your cakes using a knife, trying to make them all about the same thickness. Place the cake bottom side up and then go ahead and add your first layer of frosting. Remember that you can turn the table, making it a lot easier to smooth out the frosting. When you add your second layer, get down to look at the cake so you can really see if it's level and also centered. Make adjustments as needed by pressing down on one side or another or shifting it so that it's centered. Now let's add the next layer of filling. Now we can start the crumb coat, and remember, this doesn't need to be pretty when you're using the piping bag because we're going to take the offset spatula to spread the frosting, and then we'll use the scraper to smooth it down. The top coat does not need to be as thick as when we filled in the layers because this is just the crumb coat to hold in the crumbs, and we're going to add another top coat after this. Now we can use the offset spatula to spread the frosting and fill in any gaps. Remember to hold the scraper at an angle so that we can gently smooth the frosting, and also keep the bottom completely flat on the cake board to make sure that the scraper is perfectly vertical. It helps to keep the scraper clean, so if you need to, remove any extra frosting that you find sticking to it. You can make your edges nice and crisp by getting down level with the cake, and after each pass, wipe off the frosting that's stuck to the spatula. I clean off the cake board by using the offset spatula or a paper towel. This time let's make a thicker layer on the cake because I'm going to use one of the textured sides of the comb, and that involves removing a little bit of frosting as we go. First, I'm going to gently smooth the sides using the straight edge of the scraper. This doesn't need to be perfect because I'm going to flip it to use the textured side. It's incredibly important to make sure you're very gentle when you start using a cake comb. Also, make sure you're working with the scraper at an angle. We'll apply more and more pressure as we go, scraping off any extra frosting that's building up. I had a few areas that were scraped down to the point where you could see the cake through the frosting, and that's fine. Just add a little bit more right on top and then we'll use the scraper again. Apply very light pressure with the scraper. We're just trying to make it seamless with the frosting that was just added, so you really shouldn't be applying much pressure to the rest of the cake. Repeat the previous steps as necessary. It takes a lot of practice to make it completely seamless when you lift up the cake comb. Just remember to continue turning the table as you very gradually lift it off of the cake. I really loved using this texture of the cake comb because when I was going to make my crisp edges, I essentially had a line to follow. Don't forget to wipe the spatula clean each time you make a pass. If you look at the upper left, you'll notice the spot where the frosting was sort of hanging over the edge. Things like that happen, and if you pay attention to these details, it makes a huge difference in the presentation of your cake. Now that the cake's frosted, we can prepare the buttercream to make flowers. We need to thicken it by adding powdered sugar. There isn't an exact measurement here, so add it little by little until it appears to be really thick. Now that the cake's frosted, we can prepare the buttercream to make flowers. We need to thicken it by adding powdered sugar. There isn't an exact measurement here, so add it little by little until it appears to be really thick. Some people say it should be like Play-Doh. I personally have a hard time working with that. And don't worry, you can't really mess this up. So make it nice and thick, and if that doesn't work, you can add some heavy cream or milk to sort of loosen it back up. But watch as I begin to mix in these bowls. You can see that it's standing up really firmly, and you'll see that it's a little tougher to mix the food coloring in. I'm using 4 colors. I'm using pink, white, green, and yellow. I obviously don't need to add any coloring to the white frosting, but green will be for the leaves, yellow will be for the details, and I'm going to make my petals pink and white. I love the pastel shades for the flowers. You can add more food coloring if you'd like, you can use different colors, and also keep in mind that as the frosting sits, the color will actually darken. First, I'm going to use the leaf tip, so I'm going to fill this bag with green. Now, it's important to watch part 2 of this class before moving forward because I made some changes to this frosting. Now I'm preparing the yellow to be for the details, so I'm adding the writing tip in and I'm going to snip off the end to make sure it fits perfectly. Always clip the tip just a little bit at a time because it's easy to make the opening too large so that the piping tip falls right through. I wanted to use 2 colors for the flower petals, so I'm making a row of pink frosting and then beside it I'll add a row of white. You can see here that the frosting is pretty thick. Once the frosting is laid out, you can roll it up and then cut an opening at the end. I cut into the frosting slightly. That just ensures that it's a balanced and even start. This is the tip that we'll use to make the petals, so let's go ahead and prepare this piping bag. Don't cut too much of the piping bag to start. You can always trim it down more if needed. I want the pink to be at the center of the flower, so I'm going to try and line it up with the wider side of the piping tip. My goal is to have pink on the inside of the flower and white on the outside. So the thicker side of the piping bag is going to be the inside of the flower. So practice a little bit until it looks exactly how you'd like, and you can turn the tip inside the piping bag to make adjustments. I find that one color seems to come through the piping bag first, the other one will follow, so it helps to just do a little bit of practicing and kind of get through that first little bit of frosting. Once you feel happy with how your colors are coming out, we can prepare the parchment paper. I cut it into little squares. They don't need to be perfect. I'd say roughly 2 inches by 2 inches. My paper actually has lines on it. Now let's pick up the flower nail and add a tiny bit of buttercream so we can stick the parchment paper on. I'm intentionally slowing down my video just so I can explain. I like the parchment paper because I can easily remove the flower while it's still soft and freeze it. It's much easier to work with a frozen flower in my opinion. Start with the wider end of the tip in the center of the nail. You want to overlap slightly each petal as you make a U shape. Now this video does a better job of explaining than I can say verbally, so I slowed it down a little bit for you. I love the cute and simple flower, so I just wanted to make a dot in the center of this one. Carefully remove the flower on the parchment paper and place it on a plate or a tray that can fit in your freezer. Here's another one just to show you again, and you can see that the edges of my petals are a little bit rough. That's intentional because I'm using a really thick frosting. If you use anything thinner than this, it can be tricky for it to hold its shape, but if it is your preference, go ahead and give it a try. Just keep on practicing. I made the center a little differently on this one to give it a tropical look. Now let's step things up a little bit. If you're comfortable making those petal shapes, let's make a wider flower. This one is going to leave some space in the center and it's going to have a lot more petals, but we can add a second layer with it, which will give it some really cool definition. Now you do the same exact thing, just on a smaller scale. And this time I'm adding some dots in the center. Just to show you again. Now I want you to just watch this clip. You won't be able to see exactly how to do it from this angle, but it gives you a good view of this cute little rosette. Now I'll use an angle where you can really see what I'm doing. This is kind of like making a series of overlapping rainbows. That's the best way to describe it. So first start by making a tower of frosting, and then at the top you want to just go around in a little spiral. After that, make a rainbow starting on the inside. There's the first one. Now, overlapping, make your second rainbow. Overlapping, make your third rainbow, and so on. And as you continue to do this, you're naturally going to end up adding layers. See, now I'm on a second row, just by overlapping, overlapping, overlapping. And you can do this as many times as you'd like. You can make a massive rose, you can make a little one, whatever your preference is for the cake that you're making. I love the way the rough edges look on these petals. I think it makes it look more natural. Making the tower is a really good way to see if you have a good consistency with your buttercream. Mine leans just slightly, and that's okay because my buttercream is easy to work with. However, if yours is completely falling over, you're going to need a thicker frosting. Don't be discouraged if you have to take the frosting out of the bag and add more sugar, because with decorating cakes, you really can't go wrong. Everything's a learning experience. You just have to wing it and go with the flow. So, for example, if it were me, I have 2 colors in my piping bag. When I remove them to mix, I would end up with one light pink. It might not be what I wanted in the first place, but it's still going to be a gorgeous flower. Here's what the leaves will need to look like. You pull away and that's how you make the point. However, the frosting needs to be soft, unlike the frosting we used for the flowers. This took me 2 attempts. I added a little bit of heavy cream until it was the right consistency. After a half an hour in the freezer, the flowers are solid and they peel right off of the parchment paper. Just don't hold on to them for too long because the warmth of your hands will melt them down. But you just add a little bit of buttercream and place the flowers wherever you'd like. I can't say that I love the arrangement that I made. I usually prefer just a small cluster of flowers, but it was a lot of work to make all of these, so I wanted to include as many as I could. Now add some leaves for a finishing touch, and to do this you want to squeeze the piping bag and then stop squeezing it when you pull away. That's how the frosting will pull into a point. I should have cleaned off the piping tip between each leaf because you'll see that these aren't completely perfect, but like I said before, decorating cakes is always a learning experience. For a little extra fun, I decided to add some yellow dots. Remember I mentioned that this is a writing tip. If you're feeling ambitious, give it a try. There's a reason I provide larger cake boards. When I started writing, and I will admit I am still working on improving my writing, it's something I'm always practicing, I decided to do it on the cake boards. That's because you can wipe it right off and try again and again if you need to. And I definitely have times where it's multiple attempts before I'm happy with it. If you're writing directly on your cake, try freezing it first. Then you can also scrape it off without damaging the frosting underneath. Nope. And trying again. Yes. So I just want you to know, this took me 5 times. I didn't want to torture you with watching them all. Thanks, guys. Send me any questions you have.